Path of Exile 2 crafting is confusing whether you're a new player or someone that's played for a little while. I'm going to show you every single thing you need to know about crafting, trading, building the best weapons, all in this one single guide. Now, before we go over everything, I do want to start from scratch and cover the basics for anyone that's unfamiliar. So when you start playing Path of Exile 2, obviously you're going to start collecting these orbs, and these orbs are essentially used to upgrade your gear with new magical affixes, just like you can see here in blue on a bunch of these different pieces. Now, especially when you start early, there's a couple main things you want to pay attention to. Now, obviously, if you have a new character, you can get all the gear that you have, sell it at vendors, make some easy gold, and then buy your way up for equipment early. Now, one of the best ways to learn the game, the most ideal way to get powerful early, is going to be by using these vendors to disenchant your items. Now we can see here, if you pick up regular items, you want to sell them, but you want to make sure early you're disenchanting these blue items. The blue items will give you transmutation shards. And what those actually do is turn a normal item into a magic item, which is great early for picking up normal items and making them powerful right off the start. Also, as you begin to level, you want to make sure you're picking up all the yellows you can find to salvage them for regal shards. Now, regal orbs are important because it upgrades a magic item into a rare item, so you want to make sure you're picking up every yellow item you can early and salvaging it if you don't want it versus selling it. Eventually, when you're crafting items, you want a ton of these, so in case you get a solid magic item, you can bump it up to a rare in hopes that it hits really good affixes. On top of disenchanting early, you also want to make sure that you're salvaging early. Now, salvaging early specifically applies to two things. Those are going to be items with sockets like this one, and items that have a stat on it that say quality plus 3%, 4%, any quality stat. For instance, if we come in here and salvage this socketable item, we're going to get an Artificer's Shard. Now that's important because you want to be saving these up because these Artificer's Shards turn into Artificer's Orbs, and that allows you to add a rune socket to a weapon or piece of armor, which later on towards the end game, you want to make sure you have enough of these because you end up wanting to slot very high powerful runes in your gear. And as you salvage things with qualities on it, you can see we have the Whetstone, Armor Scrap, and Arcanus Etcher. The big one here is Armor Scrap. Eventually you'll begin to build this up as you salvage items with quality on them. Also super important because once you finally get your really powerful in-game gear, you're going to want to max out the quality on all of it to plus 20%, giving it much higher overall stats and making it really, really good. So those are the quick basics of stuff you want to look for early. Now let's get a little bit more advanced, but again, I'm going to try and keep it as simple and straightforward as possible. First, when we're talking about enchanting and crafting and upgrading your gear, you can see this hammer has a ton of affixes already on it. What you can actually do if you're on PC, for instance, you can actually hit Alt to inspect this item. So the big thing with Path of Exile in general, you're allowed to have a total on, for instance, a rare item of 6 total affixes, 3 of those being prefixes and 3 of those being suffixes. Now we use this chest. If you looked on this chest piece, we actually have 3 affixes on it currently out of 6, 2 of them being prefixes. The point of this before we go into actually upgrading this stuff is, there are certain bonuses you can get that will be prefixes, and there are certain bonuses you can get as only specifically suffixes. For instance, the lightning resistance, I believe, is only a suffix, while this increased armor rating is only a prefix. And given it's a rare item, it can have 6 total, 3 of each. If you have an item like this chest piece that already has 3 prefixes on it, but it has 1 suffix, so it has 2 open spots, right? Those 2 spots can only be suffixes unless you use something like the Chaos Orb that removes a random modifier and you hope that it's one of the prefixes and then gives you a new one because, again, it's already maxed out with 3 prefixes, ideally in this example, meaning you wouldn't be able to roll increased armor if it wasn't already on there. To give you an idea, I'll explain the differences in the 4 prefixes you can see here in just a second. Just as an example, we'll look at this increased physical damage percentage. Now, one important tool that I am using that you should definitely use is this POE DB site, which I'll put down in the description. And this is one of the things you really want to pay attention to and know just for your class in general. You can see it breaks down all the gear and weapons here. So if we want to go into two-handed maces, which my maul currently is, it's going to show us all of the available prefixes and all of the available suffixes for this gear. You can see here it says % increased physical damage. If we actually go back in game, that's increased physical damage, and you can see it is a prefix. that isn't going to exist as a suffix. So like I mentioned, if you have max prefixes and you're just adding on additional modifiers and there's not an open prefix spot, you're not going to be able to get that specific attribute because it's only a prefix specifically. This way, when you're crafting, you can kind of plan out ideally what you're looking for out of your gear, meaning you can come in here and expect to get, okay, increased physical damage, adds fire damage, and adds chaos damage as an example, as well as getting strength, increased attack speed, and reduced attribute requirements. That way you can get an idea of how these can be structured out because it's pointless using an orb, which I'll show demonstration wise here in a minute, to upgrade and continue crafting your gear when all of the suffix or prefix spots are filled up and you're trying to get something and you just can't get it because you cannot get that attribute added to your gear. So just keep that in mind. Now, before we go into the details of crafting, again, I'm setting us up for success here with enough information so you can understand how this works. I do want to point out sometimes you'll see gear that has modifiers like this on it that have 4 prefixes and 2 suffixes. Well, believe it or not, this actually only has 5 total affixes on it. It has 1 more open spot. The reason I say that because certain affixes, whether they're either one of these, have what we call hybrid affixes essentially. And that's going to be one affix that has 2 actual stat bonuses attached. In this case, if you look at the increased physical damage and accuracy rating, if we go back to the site here and zoom in, you can see this prefix right here includes both increased physical damage and accuracy rating. So that's all one affix by itself. It just includes 2 stats. Now, another thing to understand is there's certain items as you begin to level your build, but also this is a good thing to know for upgrading. So things like this belt, different jewelry pieces, etc., have what we call implicits, and those are implicit stats that come naturally on the piece of gear itself. So this plate belt of the lion, it comes with an implicit, which again, you can look up this kind of gear on the site. It comes with an implicit for armor as an example, which is why this is a magical item. And you see 2 magical things here, which it can only have a maximum of 2, right? But you also see an additional plus 110 to armor. And that's because this can roll an implicit like armor, and you can see that it's shown above that like kind of blue line in between them. The same goes for other gear like amulets. For instance, this 2.7 life regeneration per second is an implicit on the amulet. Same goes for things like sapphire rings. Sapphire rings will give you cold resistance, and emerald rings would give you things like accuracy. We can look in our stash here. Again, a sapphire ring is giving us cold resistance. And then if we look at topaz rings, they give you lightning resistance. Another topaz, all lightning resistance rings. So specific gear gives you certain implicit affixes that will already kind of guaranteed to be on the gear and be a certain thing. And before we get into upgrading everything, the last thing I kind of really want to mention are there are breakpoints for the gear. Obviously, higher level gear is stronger, meaning it has more requirements, more strength, dex, intelligence requirements, right? But if you're looking for certain pieces of gear might give you higher level breakpoints. And so where one hammer could roll, for instance, 15 to 33 physical damage. And so we look here, this hammer currently adds 15 to 33 physical damage. You can see the range rolls right there for physical damage, or just look at the top one for a percent increase, 15 and 19. Those rolls as your item goes up in level, there are different breakpoints for these items, meaning once you get to the next set above level 48, it's going to have higher requirements, obviously, but that roll range can be significantly higher, meaning a lot more power on your weapon or gear. Now that we know all the information about weapons, so hopefully you understand how all of that stuff works and it makes it a little bit clearer, let's go into how we actually upgrade this stuff and how we upgrade it effectively, not waste all our gems, and hopefully make some really good pieces. Is first, before anything, given that you've already got the early access version of the game, the first thing we need to do before we craft anything 1000% is go into the shop, go to stash tabs, and make sure you are buying this currency stash tab. I'm telling you, this will save your life a million times over, even if you just buy that one thing, because you get 300 free points for early access anyways, so it's basically free already, but it will make the world a difference. That way you don't have to worry about keeping your gems in order and stuff. It stores it all in here for you. Best organization ever. If you don't have that, you need to do it now. And while you're in there, also upgrade at least one stash tab to a premium stash tab, which I'll go over here in a little bit. So that way you can trade your gear. You have to buy a premium stash tab in order to do that. And you can also buy this essence stash tab, which I did because, again, it's basically free at this point. Why not? It keeps all your essences together. Best organizational tool ever, and will save you more time than you even understand. So definitely go and do that first. Now that that's said, I'll go over kind of how we want to work about crafting these items and how we can craft some really good ones for really cheap. So just as an example, I'm going to buy this maul right here, basic right out of the gate. So especially if you're early in the game, whether you're early in the game or later, and specifically finding these random white common items. They're what will probably prove to be the most valuable items in the game, are these white common items. The reason I say that is because ideally once we start upgrading our pieces, this is kind of the basics of how it works. So once it's a common item, it has obviously no magical modifiers on it or no crazy affixes on it. But what we're going to use is our Orb of Transmutation, and you can use this early in the game as well to make some super powerful pieces, even with just one modifier on them early. For any common item, we're obviously always going to use our Orb of Transmutation to turn it into a magical item. This is going to give us our first affix, which you can see here is increased attack speed. Now, the next move, we have a couple of choices. We could choose something like this Regal Orb, where we upgrade this magic item to a rare item and add one modifier to it. I'm showing you this as an example because if you do this, these are more rare orbs and worth more and take a lot longer to get. But if you use this, what will happen is it will turn this item into a yellow item with 2 modifiers on it. Why is that bad? Because then you have to use more rare orbs to continue to upgrade to put modifiers on it, because now it's a rare item and those orbs are essentially more expensive. So you always, whether it's a flask or whatever, use an Orb of Augmentation. Second, you want 2 affixes on this weapon before you upgrade it to a rare, literally every time. So we're going to use that to put a secondary affix on our maul. You can see we got something pretty good here. Adds 4 to 60 lightning damage. Now, one thing to note here, which again is hopefully going to show your understanding of how the weapon system works, is if we hit Alt to inspect this, we have a prefix and a suffix. A magic item can only have 2 total affixes, 1 of each. So if you're going to craft a weapon and you're looking for a base prefix before you worry about throwing away all of your other orbs, continuously upgrading this thing to rare, upgrading it to have 4 affixes on it. If the one thing you need on this weapon is a prefix, and you roll a random white common item one time and you roll a prefix that's not the one you want, it might be good to just throw this item away and start over with a new one, because the uncommon items aren't expensive. And at that point, you're using a lot of orbs to chance continually getting it. So if you don't get it right off rip, I would just throw the item away in case you don't get what you want early. Your odds are your odds. So now if we were actually trying to craft a powerful item, let's say we got 2 affixes that we really want here. We could then use a Regal Orb to upgrade a magic item to a rare item and add 1 modifier to it. Now, this is the next step we have to do in the order, so we can change this to a yellow item and then increase the affixes again up to that 6 mark. So you can see if we use this, we're going to change it to a yellow, and we're now going to get a 3rd affix, and it's going to be 25 strength. Keep in mind, again, this now means we have 2 suffixes, meaning we have room to roll 1 more. So if we were to upgrade this again, odds are we're probably going to get a prefix next, just based on the odds. Here is where Exalted Orbs come in, which are probably the most precious currency right now in Path of Exile 2. And that's because it augments a rare item, meaning if you have a yellow item already, you have to use an Exalted Orb to continue adding affixes to it. So let's say we got 3 really good affixes and we're just going to keep rolling on this thing. If we don't have what we want by now, we definitely want to throw the item away so we're not wasting all of our orbs. But let's say, just as an example, even using 1 just kind of hurts me, but we're going to use it. And then you can see we have +2 to level of all melee skills. But we've basically created a semi-decent weapon just by regular playing standards. Now let's say we have this yellow weapon at 6 active affixes, meaning we can't add any more to it. And we have 5 of them that are perfect and 1 that's not. And we want to get rid of that one. This is a complete gamble, but whether you have 6 or 2 or 3, this is what this is made for. This Chaos Orb removes a random modifier and augments a rare item with a new one. So if you want to chance that, get rid of a random modifier and add a new one in place, you can most definitely do that. But again, it is a complete gamble and they're pretty rare. I only currently have 1 of them. And then finally, if you haven't used one of these Val Orbs, this actually modifies an item unpredictably and corrupts it. And once it corrupts your item, and if you find corrupted items from normally playing through some of the activities, you can no longer modify that item after that. So if we right click on this and we go ahead and throw this on our maul, we click on it and it's now corrupted. But ideally this gives you a chance to have a one last ditch effort to say, okay, maybe do something crazy with my weapon and give me some decent boost, or it's really not going to give me much of anything and it's just going to brick my weapon so it can no longer be upgraded. So roll the dice on your item if you want, but that's what they're there for. Now, another orb we didn't touch on is the Orb of Alchemy. You can use this to upgrade a normal item to a rare item straight with 4 modifiers. It takes a random common item like this maul, how it was previously, and upgrades it to like it is now with 4 modifiers on it. Now, the other 4 orbs are this Orb of Chance. This will unpredictably either upgrade a normal item to a unique rarity or destroy it. Meaning if you have a chest plate, I believe how this works is if you have a normal white common chest plate, you can use the Orb of Chance and it has a chance to then either destroy that item or upgrade it to a unique chest plate of that same kind of type. Now, currently, these are extremely rare to find. I don't know how many people have found them, but the one way to get them consistently, if you're able to just kind of off of RNG, is if you find these unique items. Let's just say this unique hammer that I'm not going to use for this character. If I wanted, what I could actually do is come in here and I could disenchant that item like we were doing with the other ones. And if you disenchant a unique item, you actually get a chance shard. It works the same way with the orbs. As you begin to disenchant this, you get these shards for the Orb of Chance. And once you get 10 of them, you get an Orb of Chance itself. So that's something to keep in mind, that way you can actually guarantee yourself over time with gear that you're not going to use, that you eventually get one to try and get a unique piece that you're missing. And finally, our last three we don't really have yet, which is the Divine Orb. This randomizes the numeric values of modifiers on an item. So for instance, on our hammer, if we hit Alt to look at this, we have the ranges, the number ranges in between kind of what we rolled on our gear. If we look at that top 16%, it could be between 15 and 19%. If we use that orb, it's going to take all of these modifiers on the entire piece and it's going to re-roll all of them within those ranges. So if we have all of them that are low, but a really good like armor piece, but all the ranges are low, we have all the stats right, you can use that to re-roll it and hopefully get much higher rolls. Next is the Orb of Annulment. It removes a random modifier from an item. In case you want to add one modifier, have the chance to get one and save an item. And then finally, the Mirror of Kalandra. The Mirror of Kalandra creates a mirrored copy of your item, meaning if you have a crazy, I'm talking like crazy item, and you want to use a crazy orb on it to try and do something like one of the Vol orbs, that way you have a chance to upgrade the item or brick it, or you just want to make an insane copy of the weapon, whether you're going to try crafting again on it or not, or just doubling up and dual wielding, whatever it is, if you have one of those, which they're very rare to find, but I know some of them have already been found. Now, to give you an example with some of the things to do with affixes specifically, is the affixes are actually weighted differently. So if you're looking for specific affixes on your gear, you might actually have a little bit harder of a time than you think. For instance, if we take this common helmet, we take our transmutation orb and make it a magical item, and then add that additional affix to it right here. We now have two affixes on this helm. You can see this helmet requires strength and dex. So if we were to go look at the helmets here, you can search by helmet, strength, and dex. You can look at this and it shows you again the exact things you can have on here. So one important thing is if you wanted to roll maximum life is a much more common prefix than something like number to level of all minion skill gems. That's very specific and it's a much more rare drop. Now what's actually happening is they're taking some of the data, I believe, from the trading items from the POE trading site and coming up with odds. So you have different odds of rolling these. So you have a much more likely chance to get life than this. And I actually have some of the odds that they've calculated, I believe, over analyzing some of that data. You have a 27 or 28% almost to get maximum life if you roll this and get a prefix. Number to level of all minion skill gems, if that's like the grand thing you're looking for, you have a 0.75% chance of rolling that prefix, which is a lot rare, meaning you really need to get that one on the first go before you waste all your orbs. So ideally, again, that would mean if we were looking for that on this helmet, we would want to get it on the first or second roll. So if we rolled this to a magic item and we got a prefix, that's a prefix and a very rare one at that. If we roll again, we're just going to get a suffix. So unless you're planning on wasting your gem to turn it into a rare item to get another chance at it, throw the piece away, start over, because I'm telling you, you will waste all of your valuable orbs doing that. If you have a rare thing, you want to try and get it on the first or second go before you turn this thing into a rare item, and then it starts getting costly, which again is just tough on your gear overall. So one of the things you could do is go out and find and farm random pieces like that, especially if you're looking for that specific one. Now, what I would recommend doing in this case, if you have an item specifically with certain implicits or whatever that you know you want because of the way the stats and the rolls and the things you can get on it are, I would go onto the POE website, which I'll link again in the description, and then you can search for any of your specific armor here. So if I want a one-handed mace, you can choose any item rarity and you can specifically name the exact type of mace that you want. So let's say I wanted the Cultist Great Hammer. Let's say whatever reason that's the thing I want because I know it has all the possible rolls on it that I would want. You can then search that Great Hammer here and change the rarity to normal, so that way we get a regular starter base item. That way you have a base item to start upgrading from, because again, we can do our magical affixes first and hope to get a really good start. You can see I have it sorted by item level 40 and above, but you can find these base weapons and buy them for one singular exalted orb. So you can spend a couple exalted orbs and get a couple of this exact base weapon that you want, so that way you know you can get the best chance at the exact rolls you want. But it's better if you're trying to find that perfect set of gear to maybe consider buying a couple of these off the market. Now, additionally, people are looking for uncommon items like this as well, so that way they can upgrade their build. So if you find specific uncommon items, it actually doesn't hurt to actually possibly trade them and make some free exalted orbs yourself. You'll be surprised at the amount of people that would probably buy some of your basic uncommon high level weapons for this exact purpose. So let's say you found an uncommon weapon and we upgraded our stash tabs to premium. One thing you can do is title this however you want. You need to go up here into the stash options. You need to right click on this to customize it and click this option to set it to public. Once you set it to public, you can then right click on anything and you can set an exact price. You can change the exact price to an orb you want. Ideally, you can look online to give a comparable thing. Ideally, I just set decent gear that's common or stuff that I think might sell as one or however many exalted orbs it might be worth on the market. So you can make free exalted orbs like this. Ideally, get 2 or 3 premium stash tabs, maybe fill it up with stuff and just set everything to sell it for an exalted orb. And you might get a couple free ones, maybe 5, 10, 20, who knows, and get a bunch of free orbs that way that you can then go spend on gear and then upgrade the gear you specifically want, all because you picked up some items you may not have normally picked up. Now, one thing to keep in mind with trading is if you decide that you want this Cultist Great Hammer and you're going to roll specific magical attributes on it, essentially, obviously you can come in here and just look and search for the weapon you want. If it's cheap, just buy it off of here. You don't necessarily need to go into crafting and all this detail, but specific base common items like this that everybody wants might be a little bit more expensive. So one thing you could actually do is come in here and change this from normal to show magic, for instance. So if we search that, we'll then see a bunch of magic ones on here. And the cool thing about this is you can actually snipe a bunch of decent weapons. So for instance, let's say we were looking for something with +3 level to melee skills, and that was the big thing we wanted. We could actually come in here and instead of buying those other ones for 1 exalted orb to try and roll it, we get lucky here and this magic one already has +3 to level of all melee skills. And if some of the other attributes like adds 1 to 33 lightning damage doesn't hurt you, or let's say you were looking for the base item with attack speed and then other useful things on it, you could come in here and instead of spending an exalted orb on a white uncommon base weapon so you can craft it from scratch, we found one here with 10% increased attack speed already on it, and it still has 1 free other magical affix roll that would be really cheap, and you can come in here and buy this for an orb of transmutation. Now I want to touch on runes really quick just for a second, because a lot of people, I don't know that they've touched on it very much. If you do open up an item with a socket on it like this one, if you go to put this rune in here, it says right there on the thing that you cannot remove it. So once you put it in there, it's in there forever. So if you get a god roll piece of gear and put a horrible rune in it, there's no fixing it. I would save them for a little while until you need them, or until you feel like, you know, you need some resistance, because you do get them quite quickly. So if you by all means get a piece with a socket in it that you know you're going to replace because you're not very high level, you can throw a rune in there to help you out 100% of the time, and it will be useful to you. There's some people may use, what you do want to be aware of is the currency exchange. The currency exchange will be at one of the vendors. You can simply jump in here, and it is a little bit confusing if you haven't used it yet, but I'll break it down super easy. You essentially just put what you want here. So let's say we want an exalted orb, which typically are, you know, pretty desirable right now. Then you can select something that you have to give. It has a kind of set market ratio depending on, you know, how the market is trending with how much stuff is on it, etc. So let's say we click that we have 14 armor scrap. You can see here the market ratio is currently 1 to 5.19, and there's 30 stock at that market ratio, meaning we can put in an offer for lower and maybe it gets accepted by somebody. But right now, as it stands, we would get 1 exalted orb for selling 5.19 armor scrap, or 6 of them. So we could put this offer in, or we could do a 5 ratio. We could do that and hope that it gets accepted, and we would get 1 exalted orb for 5 armor scrap. So if we had 20 of these, we could get 4 exalted orbs that way, and we would place that order, and it would cost us 120 coins. You can trade materials like this through the currency exchange. Super easy if you have a lot of one specific one. So you can see we currently have Gem Cutter's Prison and Lesser Jeweler's Orb. Both of these are much more rare items, so if you find them, definitely pick them up. Your Lesser Jeweler's Orb is going to allow you to upgrade a support gem and add a new support gem socket to one that currently only has 2. So if we have one that only has 2, for instance, Overwhelming Presence, if we use that Jeweler's Gem here, it will then create a 3rd open slot, sort of like our Hammer of the Gods does. We have used one on them, so we can get an open support gem to place a 3rd support gem there to make that skill much more powerful. Now, each of these next levels will allow you to do one with 3, so that way you can push it to 4, and then 4 on the last one was required, so you can push it to a maximum of 5. And again, we already touched on some of these upgrades you can get from salvaging weapons. If we put this on our chest plate, you can see it has 520 armor. It then goes up to 531 because our quality goes up +2. It can be a max of +20%. And the same goes for the whetstone. You can use the whetstone on, for instance, your hammer. So you can take our physical damage, the range from up to 169 up to 173, because again, it has quality on it now, which is why you want to look out for pieces that you can salvage to save up for this for your overpowered in-game gear. And again, for crafting that higher level gear, this stuff is important to save up and make sure you have enough of it. The same goes kind of for this Gem Cutter's Prism. You can improve the quality of a skill gem with this. So you can upgrade the quality of the actual skill gem itself. And by upgrading the quality, it upgrades the stats. And you can do this up to a maximum of 20%, just like you can with, again, the armor and weapon quality upgrades. Finally is the Glass Blower, is the one right next to Gem Cutters. And it actually improves the quality of a flask. So you can use this to improve the quality of flasks to make them more powerful, just like you can other things. And finally, if you did buy the Essence tab, your essences, if you're looking for specific modifiers, allow you to modify a weapon with specific modifiers that you can target. So if you have a weapon that you're trying to hit a specific modifier on, you have an essence for it specifically, you can use that essence to add on to that piece of gear. For instance, if we're looking for something with a mana modifier, you can use this to have a chance to add specifically the mana one, which will give you the best chance of crafting something for like a sorcerer or something where you would need that specific stat. The same goes for my warrior, where I can add specifically a physical modifier to, for instance, my hammer. That being said, I know that was a lot of information, but hopefully now you should have a much better understanding of how crafting works. And let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Happy to answer them. If this helped you, like the video, subscribe if you're new, and check out either one of these Path of Exile videos for more awesome stuff. Thanks.